Good morning and welcome to the Relocation 101 Module 2, Parts 1 and 2 webinar. Parts 3 and 4 will be this afternoon beginning at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Paula Hyman. I'm from the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'm going to be your technical support for today's webinar. Just a couple of items to cover today. Your questions throughout the presentation, please put those into the questions box, just like yesterday. Our presenter will address your questions periodically throughout the presentation. And lastly, there are handouts available to download in the handout section. If for some reason you're unable to download those, put your email in the questions pod and I will get those out to you directly. I want to thank you in advance for your participation. And with that, I'll pass things off to Ms. Patty Moorman, Relocation Unit Manager with ODOT Central Office Real Estate. Patty?
Well, good morning and welcome back to Relocation 101. Now, hopefully you have downloaded your participations manual. The workbook is structured so you can take notes directly under the slides if you wish. Now, every learning module also contains the knowledge checks, and the knowledge checks in this module, they're similar really to case studies, so hopefully you'll enjoy the challenge of making the correct determinations. Of the handouts that you should have downloaded, there will be a residential and a non-residential brochure, a RECEDA brochure, an RE95, and an RE56. Now, you will get answers to all of the knowledge checks for future reference. We'll go through them after you have put your answers down. Now again, Relocation 101 is comprised of 7 total modules. This morning we are completing parts 1 and 2 of module 2. This afternoon we will be completing parts 3 and 4 of module 2. So since you are the first class for these online relocation classes, I hope you'll be patient as we work out some of the bugs in the system so we can determine what works well and what doesn't work well. These training courses were initially all structured for classroom training, so it's a little different when we are presenting these for an online course. I have a few changes to the process already that I want to share with you. Since approval of this Relocation Assistance 101 includes attendance of the relocation courses, the courses will either need to be by live webinar or by an e-learning course so we can effectively track who is participating. You now are watching a live webinar. If you're not able to attend one of the live webinars, there is a recorded e-learning course that will be available in 2 to 4 weeks. Now, at the end of each module, there will be a quiz that you will need to pass with 70% or better to move on to the next module. And each webinar is scheduled not to exceed 1 hour. So please try to set the time aside that you need so that you can complete the modules all in order. Now, I also want to discuss the requirement for attendance. If you are taking Relocation 101 to receive credit and for later approval in Relocation Assistance, your attendance is mandatory for each of these modules, and also completing that quiz at the end is also mandatory. In this first module, there was only 60% that actually completed the quiz prior to today's module. So for the first module, I'm going to kind of let it, you have to go back and do that quiz. And for module 2, you will need to complete that quiz at the end before you can start module 3. So once you have successfully passed all 7 of the modules, there will be a final exam. And for that final exam, you must pass with a 70% or better to pass the class. So please ask questions at any time by writing them in that question pod. The more you participate, the better the class is going to be for all of us. Okay, so let's get started. So Module 2 has been separated into 4 parts. Part 1 covers the importance of relocation planning, which is conceptual studies. Part 2 is providing advisory services and the relocation plan, which is the pre-acquisition survey. And these are the ones we are going to talk about today. So let's look at our learning outcomes. So at the end of this module, you will be able to state the ideal time to conduct relocation planning, prioritize items for consideration in a relocation plan, understand differences between conceptual reports and pre-acquisition surveys, describe an RE95 and its purpose, and match 4 federal highway relocation notices with their respective ODOT forms. So first we're going to talk about the early planning. So Section 6202 of the ODOT Relocation Manual and Title 49 CFR states that the agency will conduct relocation planning for federal and federal assisted projects. To comply with this law and this requirement, ODOT requires a conceptual study. So what is the timing of this conceptual study? This planning occurs during the environmental assessment process, after potential alignments are identified, but before the preferred alignment is selected. Now, depending on the complexity of the project, there may only be one alignment from beginning to end. Even in that situation, it's still necessary to have this study completed if you have any displacements so that the information can be included in the environmental document. So what triggers this report and who asks for it? Your environmental department may ask for this when they are compiling their environmental document. But even if they do not, you still need to be aware that if there is any potential displacement on your project and you have a footprint, it is time for this study. You may have plans, you may only have a corridor, you may only have one alignment, you may have 5. I have done conceptual studies where I have looked at a project with an appraiser where we taped together county maps and there was a corridor drawn on the county maps. So whatever information you have, you look at everything in that corridor. So what is the purpose of this study? So thorough planning will identify the potential problems and provide the effective solutions to resolve the issues. So planning helps the agency to meet the right-of-way clear dates, while also assisting to provide the best relocation assistance to displaced persons, including those with special or unique needs. So the written conceptual report. So when the agencies prepare a relocation conceptual report in the early stages of the project development, an inventory of the characteristics for the individuals, the families, the businesses, the farms, and the nonprofit organizations to be relocated will most likely be based on a visual canvas of the project and the surrounding area. Data from public, private agencies, and even the census data. The important thing to remember about the conceptual study, you are not making personal contact with the potential displaced business or the potential displacees in a home. You are looking at the project from afar. So what are you looking for in this to put into this report? You're going to estimate the number of households to be displaced, the family characteristics. You're going to estimate income levels. Do we have elderly? Do we have large families? You're going to estimate the number of comparable replacement dwellings in the area. You're going to discuss when and if there is an adequate supply of comparable housing, and if there is not, what's your solution? You're going to estimate if you think you're going to have determinations using less than 3 comps, or if you think you're going to have last resort housing. So the visual clues can often tell you a lot when you are not to interview or disrupt the potential displaced people. You're going to look for toys in the yard. You're going to look for handicap ramps. You're going to search the internet for business websites, profiles. And one of the best sites to look at is the US Census. It's amazing the information that the US Census can tell you about a neighborhood. It can actually zero in on a block, a residential block, and it can tell you, do you have handicap? Do you have people with disabilities? Do you have elderly? Do you have young children? Do you have low income? It's amazing what the US Census can tell you. So you're also going to estimate the number of businesses, farms, the nonprofits to be displaced. You're going to estimate the availability of replacement business sites. You're going to include an analysis of businesses and the moving problems, along with possible solutions. A good place to get information on businesses, again, is look on the internet, but also local fire stations, city hall, post office. They know what's out there in the neighborhood. So the data for the study should be collected by, again, visual inspection of the project using the maps or the plans. The occupants of the structures and the potential displaced persons should not be interviewed or disrupted. At this early stage, you got 3 alignments, and maybe initially you're looking at, potential 200 displacements. By the time you get down to the 1 alignment, maybe you're only affecting 50. That's why you're not knocking on doors and talking to businesses or people at this point in the project. Additional information should be gathered by using the secondary resources, such as the interviews with the elected officials, community leaders, real estate professionals. You know, uh, uh, you know, again, city hall is a very, very good resource. Gathering information about not only what's out there, but how specific alignments might affect the community. So what else is going to be in this report? Where you're going to have discussions regarding the divisive or the disruptive effects on the community. If you put a new alignment through this part of this community? Is it going to separate emergency response services from the other side? Results of consultations with the local officials, the social agencies, community groups regarding the impacts. You're going to estimate a time of the amount of time needed to clear this project for construction. It's going to be based on what you're seeing out there. The businesses, lack of housing, whatever you might find. So who completes this study? ODOT staff who are knowledgeable in relocation assistance, or it could be an LPA or a consultant who is on ODOT's approved list for relocation. But the person or persons putting this study together, they need to have relocation knowledge. They need to know what they're looking for. So upon completion of this report, who gets a copy? You need to send a copy to the environmental department, obviously, because this report helps them to write their environmental document. A copy also is retained at the district office and also central office. Okay, so we are ready for our first knowledge check on conceptual study. Okay, you guys did really great. So the first question is, the conceptual study is completed. A is after the initiation of negotiations. That is not correct because you want to complete this way ahead in early planning. Prior to the appraisal process, well, it is prior to, but the best answer is C. It's during the environmental process, because as I mentioned a couple of times, the conceptual study is provided to the environmental section because it does become part of the environmental document. Okay, we're ready for question 2. Okay, question 2 is, information for a conceptual study is by a personal interview with each displacee. Is this true or false? Excellent. That's right. We do not disturb, knock on doors, walk-in businesses of anyone who is a potential to be displaced, because by the time they get to the final alignment, chances are, you start out with 200, you end up with 50. Okay, ready for question number 3. Data on businesses that may be affected is obtained from. Very good. Yeah, your options were visual inspection of the project from the roadway, internet searches, interviews with community leaders and real estate professionals. And the answer was D, all of the above. Okay, so let's move on to part 2, advisory services and the relocation plan. While advisory services are highly individualized and provided on a case-to-case basis, there is a group of services identified in federal regulations at 49 CFR 24.205C and in our Policy and Procedures Manual at Section 6206 that form the core of the typical advisory services under the relocation program. These are the basic services the agency must plan to make available to all the displaced persons. So let's discuss the meaning of advisory services for a residential person. The agency must identify the displaced person's needs and preferences, explaining the payments, the eligibility requirements of the relocation program, and telling the displaced person what he or she has to do to obtain assistance. This requires a personal interview done at the PreAct survey stage with each residential displaced person so that the relocation agent can fulfill these responsibilities. 49 CFR 205C2I addresses advisory services for a business. It also contains a requirement for a personal interview with each business and goes on to describe the items that will be covered in that interview. So since the interview process is a critical element in providing advisory services, we have developed guides for both residential and business interviews. These are available on our website. For the residential, we have a form RE600, and for the businesses, RE600-1. We even have a specialized form for mobile homes, which is an RE600MH. And I provided copies of the interview forms I think they were in today's handouts. If they aren't, they are on ODOT's website. So let's look at the RE600. So this is the residential site occupancy interview form. This is a form that you are going to use when you are conducting your personal interview. The top half is the general information about the household, who lives in the dwelling, how long they have been there, relationship, the ages, the relationships, tenant wages. The middle section provides the detailed information about the displacement property, the type, the size of the structure, how many rooms in the type of neighborhood. The financial information, especially for a tenant, assists the agency in determining whether or not the tenant will meet the low income criteria and possibly require housing of last resort, which I will cover in more detail in Module 6. Asking about special family needs is a critical part of the interview, since determining the individual's needs is an integral part of advisory services. So identifying these needs is also essential since the family may require housing of last resort, which will be addressed in the relocation plan that you will prepare after you complete all your interviews. There's the dwelling information, utility information, mortgage information. These are things that you need to ask when you are conducting your interview. So the business interview guide, RE600-1, collects much of the same information but is geared towards businesses. We will review these forms in much more detail in the later modules. So one of the core purposes of advisory services is to minimize the hardships for the people who have to relocate. The agency can do this by identifying the needs, providing the referrals to other services and assistance, and giving the appropriate assistance as needed. So eligibility for advisory services. So those people who will be displaced, of course, are eligible to receive advisory services. For example, if the state DOT is acquiring the property shown in the first picture on this slide, it would provide advisory services to the occupants of the house located in the area of the acquisition. Likewise, if a business is operating in the area of the acquisition, the owner-operator of the business would be eligible for advisory services. Other people who may be offered advisory services would be those whose house or business is not actually acquired, but the agency determines that they are affected by the project. For example, let's say in the second picture in the slide, the building is a business and the proposed right-of-way line is eliminating several parking spaces. The agency determines that the business is not displaced as a result of the acquisition, but it may still offer advisory services. Examples of advisory services might include information about the nature of the project, what the road will look like, and the construction schedule. The agency may also consult with the business on space requirements, current market conditions, or traffic patterns, transportation as they relate to relocating the business, offer information regarding a replacement site, or information about and referral to the Small Business Administration. So let's look at the components of a relocation plan. And I want to emphasize, because you might see this on a quiz or in the final test, the conceptual stage is the planning stage. The pre-acquisition stage is the relocation plan. In the conceptual stage, you're still planning. You have multiple alternates. By the time you get to the point where you are interviewing, you already have your route, you are putting together the relocation plan. So ODOT's pre-acquisition survey is the relocation plan. We have already noted that the early stage of the project development is the best time to identify and estimate the impact of the project on the potential displaced persons, businesses, and farms. Pre-acts are completed after the preferred alignment is known. If you uncover problems early in the planning process, the agency may consider various solutions, such as an extension of lead time, realignment, and maybe even modification to the construction plans, and implementing other mitigation measures. The analysis should include several distinct steps, which involve collecting data, identifying resources, conducting interviews, and it should also contain information about the project schedule, the project cost estimates, whether other projects in the area will result in concurrent displacements, which would affect the supply and demand for replacement properties. If you have other projects that are also going to need to utilize houses on the market, you need to address that. The agency will have to identify the availability of the housing resources to meet comparable replacement housing needs. Now, this should include an analysis of the current housing availability, whether the supply of housing is anticipated to meet the project needs. An agency's analysis may also consider construction of new housing, which may be available for project purposes, but that is very rare. The agency must also determine the availability of replacement locations for businesses, the farms, and any nonprofit organizations, including such considerations as zoning restrictions or the need for special accommodations, like they need to be near railroad tracks, shipping and warehousing, water and sewer needs. And if you ever have a bar restaurant that you need to relocate, or any type of business with a liquor license, that's always a challenge. With the liquor license. Also with the bar restaurant, you've got to consider distances to schools and churches for a relocation site. The agencies must identify the efforts necessary to provide housing of last resort. So the information obtained during the pre-acquisition survey is much more detailed and accurate than the conceptual study, and it is included in the final relocation plan. So when do you need a pre-acquisition survey interview and a pre-acquisition survey report? You need it anytime you have a displacement on a project. So section 6203.07 of the Real Estate Manual and 49 CFR 24.205A states that all projects that will cause a displacement need to have a pre-acquisition survey. The pre-acquisition interview is routine if you have a relocation parcel. It becomes a part of the relocation parcel documentation. However, unless you have a very large project with a lot of relocation, often the follow-up to actually prepare the pre-acquisition survey report is often forgotten. The relocation manual and CFR are very clear that the requirement for the follow-up report is for any project that has a displacement, not just the ones that have a large number of displacements on them. The statutes do not say it is only needed if you have more than 5 or more than 20. It does say all. So who can perform this pre-acquisition survey? At ODOT, it needs to be an agent who is knowledgeable in the relocation process. Best practice is it's also going to be the agent who is assigned to become the agent who is responsible for the relocation parcel throughout the process. If you are a consultant or a local agency, you have to have a pre-approval from ODOT for relocation in order to complete the pre-acquisition survey and the pre-acquisition report. So what's the timing for the pre-acquisition survey? The timing is when the right-of-way plans are adequately complete so that a person who is knowledgeable in relocation can determine which parcels will have a displacement. The right-of-way plans do not have to be final approved plans, but they do have to be adequately complete. The information is gathered and it acts as a very important tool for the appraiser, so that this study actually needs to be completed prior to the appraisal process. You might need to know that. So the report compiles the detailed information obtained from the interviews, discusses the project, the chosen alignment, any potential problems, plan solutions, discusses the timeline to clear all the relocation parcels. This report, it provides the manager with the information they need to effectively scope appraisers. It could result in the need for updating the cost estimate and seeking additional funding for the project. The RE95 is ODOT's property inventory classification form, and it is also completed at this early stage. It is utilized to scope the appraiser, and it becomes an integral part of that appraisal. This form identifies the rightful owners of both real and personal property to ensure that the offers are made to the right people. It also ensures that the fair market value is properly allocated not only for ownership purposes, but also to assist in calculating relocation benefits. It ensures that the persons eligible for relocation benefits are identified. It helps in the decision to prioritize the specific appraisals, which may need more time in negotiations. And it could result in a decision for advanced acquisition. We will talk more about the RE95 form this afternoon. So let's talk about the first meeting, the PreAcquisition Survey study. So what is the difference between this survey and the conceptual study? Well, as you will recall, the conceptual study is completed very early, multiple alignments from a distance. There is no direct contact with the occupants. The information compiled is gathered from data, visual, from the car, inspections, internet searches, census data, discussions with local agencies. In this study, the pre-acquisition survey, this begins again when you have your final alignment, and this lays the foundation for every successful relocation parcel. You gather the information directly from the displaced person, and this meeting may be the first contact that ODOT has with the displaced person, unless they happen to attend a public meeting. Very important to, at this meeting, that the relocation agent, this is when you you build your trust and with this person who is going to be displaced. So the relocation brochure, this actually satisfies a requirement as a general notice. The things that you need to remember about the relocation brochure is, number one, it is a requirement that they receive the relocation brochure. It is handed out at the time of your personal interview. You need to emphasize that receipt of this brochure does not establish their eligibility. The relocation eligibility notice will be delivered in writing based upon the date at initiation of negotiations or a letter of eligibility. You need to explain that they should not move without written authorization, or they may jeopardize their benefits. So what else is in this brochure? It talks about advisory services. It talks about reimbursement program. It talks about that reimbursement will be based upon receipts, paid invoices, letters of assignment for actual, reasonable, and necessary expenses. If you have never opened up one of these brochures and completely read through a brochure from front to back, I highly recommend that you do so. There is a lot of information within these brochures, and if you're handing out this brochure, I think you need to know what is inside of it. It talks about the eligible benefits of, if for the residential brochure, it's going to lay out all the benefits they could qualify for. For the non-residential brochure, it's going to lay out all the benefits they could qualify for. So 49 CFR 24.205 C2I, non-residential, states that a non-residential displacement, that it will be by a personal interview. And 49 CFR 24.205 for residential displacements also states that it will be by personal interview. This is a one-on-one, in-person contact. Permission to not conduct this interview in person requires approval from central office. This interview cannot be done by mail, by email, unless there are really unique circumstances. And this rules comes right from the Federal Code of Regulations. This interview also needs to be completed again by someone who is knowledgeable in relocation assistance. Again, preferably it's going to be the person who is going to be the relocation agent, who is going to work with this business or the homeowner or the tenant throughout the whole process. Another important thing is you need to make sure, if it's a residential parcel, that you are interviewing the head of the household. You're talking to the right person. Same with a non-residential parcel. Make sure that you are interviewing the correct representative of that business. So let's talk about what you need to know when you are conducting these interviews. What are you looking for? So for the occupants, it's all about, you need to make sure you are asking the right questions. You need to ask about the occupancy status. Do you have an owner? Do you have a tenant? Do you have a business? Do you have a nonprofit? Do you have a farm? You need to ask about hardship issues. Are there health needs? Are there elderly? Do you have issues with income levels? You need to be looking for the family composition. Large families. Do you have multiple families in one household? Is this a unique home? Why is that important? You know, how difficult are you going to have trying to find a comparable house? What is unique about this house? Are you going to need a typical home site valuation? Is this not a typical home site? These are things you're looking for. Do you have multiple fee owners? Is there a life estate? You're also going to request rent receipts or a lease if you have a tenant. You want to make sure they are signed and dated. You're going to ask if they have a public housing voucher. You're going to ask for mortgage information. You're going to request a W-9 vendor information form. At this stage, they may not be willing to fill it out, but I would present it and see if they are willing to fill it out at this time. That way you can get their information in ODOT system. Tenant certification of monthly income. This is the information that you will need to determine a housing payment benefits at a later date. The financial information, especially for a tenant, will determine if the tenant meets low income criteria, possibly require housing of last resort. The mortgage information is needed for calculation of an increased interest payment. So even though it may be uncomfortable to ask for some of this information, you need to ask for this information at your initial interview. So at this time for this report, you're also going to analyze the project. So after discussing the characteristics and the available properties, now you need to analyze and you need to correlate all this information. The plan being the relocation plan, the report that you're going to put together. We'll discuss the methodology of correlation, and it compares the needs and the availability. You need to list and explain which parcels will require a carve out, the items to be excluded. And this is something we will talk about in more detail later on. We need to list the potential relocation and the hardship issues and the plan of action to resolve those issues. You need to also list the ownership issues, such as the multiple fee owners and the life estates. You need to discuss any anticipated last resort housing, advanced acquisition, appraisals that need to be a priority. Now, an important part of this project is going to be to estimate the time needed to move all the personal property and the persons from the project area so that the manager can certify the project on time. This slide highlights the important factors that you will acquire during your personal interviews that you need to consider when estimating the time to clear the project. Now, many of these we've just went over again. In this slide, this is putting all the information together. When you do your report, you can state that you have 7 owners, 3 tenants, 2 businesses, 1 nonprofit, and 1 farm. And then you also go into how many you have that have health needs, how many that you have elderly, and so on and so forth. All of this information is addressed in your written report. There should be a description of the agency's plan for the residential advisory assistance. There should also be a discussion of the concurrent displacements that may be occurring as a result of other projects. The conclusion is usually a summary statement about the agency's plan to complete the relocation of the project. So this slide kind of gives you the order of how you would prepare this report. And if you look at ODOT's policies and procedures manual, all this information is laid out in there. So you almost have a checklist of everything you have to include, the order to put the report together. Okay, so we are ready for our next knowledge check. So the first question is, advisory services are required only if there is a property take. True or false? Very good. The answer is false, because as you will remember on the one slide, there could be a business that is only you're only affecting maybe a little parking. There is no relocation assistance needed. However, they may still have questions. So your assistance in answering their questions, providing construction plans, whatever they may need, that is advisory services. So we're ready for question number 2. So question number 2, ODOT's relocation plan is a written report known as Okay, majority of you did get the correct answer. Remember, the conceptual study is the early planning, but it's not the relocation plan. The pre-act survey is the act of the interviews, but the pre-acquisition study report is the actual relocation plan. And of course, the appraisal is what comes after by using all the information that you just put in the pre-acquisition survey report. Okay, let's go on to question 3. So the pre-acquisition survey report is prepared when? Very good. Most of you did get the correct answer. A, in the early planning, that again is a conceptual study. That is done as part of the environmental document. B, after the appraisal, you don't want it after the appraisal because they're going to use this report. So it's done before the appraisal. The correct answer is C. It is after you have the personal interviews, but before the appraisal. After you have all your personal interviews, you've gathered all your information, then you're preparing the report. It is before the appraisal because the appraiser is going to use some of the data you have out of there, mainly the RE95, which we'll talk about this afternoon. Okay, so this concludes this morning's session. And are there any questions before we close out this session, this parts 1 and 2? Okay, well, seeing no questions, I will see you back here this afternoon at 1 o'clock, and we will then be talking in detail about the RE95s and how they help with the appraisal scoping. So thank you all for attending this morning, and I will see you back this afternoon.